Moana's live-action remake is sitting at 34% with critics and 90% with verified moviegoers. That is a 56-point gap. One side sees an unnecessary copy. The other sees exactly the crowd-pleasing adventure it wanted. But here is the strange part. Once you read the actual reactions, instead of only looking at the scores, both groups are responding to the same defining quality. They simply cannot agree on whether that quality saves the film or proves it never needed to exist.
Quick transparency before we go further. I have not seen the movie, so this is not me pretending to give you a personal review. This is a sourced analysis of professional reviews, verified ticket buyer reactions, and the way these scores actually work. By the end, you will understand why 34 and 90 can both be honest, why the difference looks even bigger than the real disagreement, and which side you are most likely to fall on. At the time of this recording, Rotten Tomatoes lists more than 150 critic reviews and over 500 verified audience ratings.
The film opened in cinemas on July 10th. It runs for 1 hour and 55 minutes. Thomas Kyle directs, Catherine Laga'aia makes her screen debut as Moana, and Dwayne Johnson moves from voicing Maui to physically playing him. And this is not Disney reviving a forgotten movie from several generations ago. The animated Moana was released less than 10 years earlier. Nielsen says it was watched for more than 13 billion minutes in 2024 and has been the most streamed movie in Nielsen's rankings since tracking began in 2020. Disney did not need to remind people what Moana was. It needed to convince them that a story they already knew extremely well was worth paying to experience again. That pressure sits underneath almost every review. The biggest critical complaint is not that Moana's story is bad. In fact, many negative reviews still admire the original story, music, and characters. Their complaint is that the remake preserves so much of that material that it struggles to establish a reason of its own. The Associated Press described the film as close to a shot-for-shot and note-for-note recreation. Other critics used words like recycled, redundant, and unnecessary. Rotten Tomatoes consensus says the animated predecessor remains the superior adventure. Their basic question is simple. If the plot, songs, jokes, emotional moments, and even some performances are already available in a beloved animated film, what does this version add beyond human faces and new surfaces? That question becomes even sharper because the original still feels current. Many adults remember its release, while children continue to watch it repeatedly on streaming. There has not been enough distance for the story to feel rediscovered. To skeptical critics, it can feel less like a fresh interpretation and more like an expensive reconstruction of something that never went away.
But repetition is only the first part of the criticism. The second problem is the change of medium. Animation can make a living ocean, an argumentative tattoo, a shape-shifting demigod, tiny coconut pirates, and a giant singing crab feel as if they all naturally belong in one world. Live action still needs enormous amounts of digital effects to create those things.
Some reviewers, especially Variety, found the imagery colorful and artfully executed. Others thought the green screen work, darker palette, and synthetic environments made the adventure feel smaller and less expressive than the animated version. Several reviews also found the pacing slower or the musical staging less energetic. Dwayne Johnson became another dividing point. Some critics praised his chemistry with Catherine and felt nobody understood Maui better. Others found his physical transformation distracting and thought an animated character inspired by Johnson worked better than Johnson trying to inhabit that exaggerated design in live action. At this point, it sounds as though the 34% score tells the whole story. But this is where the critics complicate their own argument. Across positive, mixed, and negative reviews, Catherine Laga'aia is repeatedly singled out as the film's strongest element. Reviewers praise her warmth, singing voice, and ability to make Moana feel like a person instead of an imitation. Rena Owen as Grandma Tala also receives strong notices, and multiple critics value seeing Polynesian performers physically embody the story.
Disney says more than 200 Pacific actors appear in the production, giving its cultural representation a dimension that animation could not reproduce in exactly the same way. The songs remain another major strength. Even critics who disliked the remake often admitted that the music still works. Variety went much further, calling this the best of Disney's direct live-action remakes, and arguing that although it cannot replace the original, it earns a place beside it. Other positive reviews praised the chemistry, humor, selected visual effects, and emotional sincerity. So 34% does not mean every critic saw a disaster. It means most critics ultimately decided that the strengths were not enough to recommend the entire film. That difference will matter in a moment. Now look at the verified audience reactions.
Comments on Rotten Tomatoes repeatedly say that the remake was just as enjoyable as the animated version, that Disney did not mess up the story, that the family loved it, and that it honored the film they already knew. Notice what those viewers are praising. They are not celebrating a radical new direction. They are celebrating recognition. For a critic watching new releases every week, predictability can feel like a creative failure. For a family whose child has sung "How Far I'll Go" for years, predictability can be the entire reason to buy a ticket. They want the songs, the emotional moments, Maui's jokes, Moana's journey, and the reassurance that Disney has not changed the thing they love. That enormous streaming history matters here.
Moana became a family ritual through repetition. Its relationship with audiences was never built on constant surprise. It was built on children asking to watch it again, parents learning every song, and a story becoming more comforting because it was familiar. The remake offers that familiarity on a cinema screen with human performers standing inside it. And now we reach the one quality producing both scores: faithfulness.
Critics see faithfulness and translate it as redundancy. Fans see faithfulness and translate it as respect. Critics ask, what new artistic reason does this movie have to exist? Ticket buyers ask, did Disney give me the Moana experience I paid for without ruining it? Based on the early reactions, the film struggles with the first test and passes the second. That is the heart of the 56-point gap. It is not simply that critics hate fun or that audiences have bad taste. The two groups are applying different expectations to the same evidence. One side is comparing the remake with everything live action could have added. The other is comparing it with everything Disney could have changed or removed. One side asks what was gained. The other asks whether anything important was lost. But before anyone declares that the audience is right and the critics are completely out of touch, the scores themselves need to be unpacked. A Rotten Tomatoes score is not an average grade. 34% does not mean that critics gave Moana an average score of 3.4 out of 10. It means 34% of the included reviews were classified as positive. A mildly negative review counts in the same direction as a brutal takedown. A cautiously positive review counts in the same direction as a perfect score. The 90% audience number works similarly. It means 90% of the verified ratings were positive. It does not mean the average viewer gave the film 9 out of 10. Rotten Tomatoes currently treats an audience rating of 3.5 stars or higher as positive. Someone who thought the film was merely pretty good therefore counts in the same direction as someone who thought it was a masterpiece. This system can make a disagreement look more extreme than the written reactions really are. Metacritic helps show that difference. There, the film has a score of 41 from 37 critics, but 19 of those reviews are classified as mixed, compared with 11 negative reviews and 7 positive ones. In other words, the largest group is not critics calling the movie an absolute disaster. It is critics saying the movie is underwhelming, average, or too unnecessary to recommend. The audience score also needs context. That 90% comes from verified ticket buyers, not 90% of every person with an opinion about Moana.
People who bought opening weekend tickets were more likely to be existing fans,
families, or viewers already interested in the remake. People who looked at the trailers and decided to stay home are not represented in that number. A much smaller Metacritic user sample is considerably more negative, although there are too few ratings there to treat it as a reliable public referendum. Opening night audiences also gave the movie an A- cinema score. That is positive and supports the idea that most paying viewers enjoyed themselves, but it is not evidence that every audience member considered the film perfect.
The honest headline is therefore more nuanced than critics hate it and everyone else loves it. Professional critics are mostly mixed to negative. The verified moviegoers who chose to buy tickets are overwhelmingly satisfied. Those are different claims about different groups. So, based on the published reactions, who is most likely to enjoy this version of Moana?
If you want a close recreation of the story, already love the songs, want to see Polynesian performers bring Motu Nui to life, or plan to take children who repeatedly watch the original, the audience reaction suggests you will probably have a good time. If you believe a remake should transform its source, introduce major new ideas, or prove that live action can accomplish something animation could not, the critical reviews suggest you may leave wondering why you did not simply watch the original again. Catherine Laga'aia appears to be the safest part of the film. She earns praise from almost every side of the debate.
Dwayne Johnson and the digital visuals appear to be the biggest wildcards. Depending on the viewer, they are either major attractions or constant reminders that the animated version handled this world more naturally. Because I have not seen the movie, I cannot honestly tell you which group is correct. But I can tell you what the reviews reveal. The live-action Moana is not dividing people because nobody can agree on what Disney made.
It is dividing people because almost everybody agrees that Disney made an extremely faithful recreation of a beloved film. To critics, that is the accusation. To its happiest audience members, that is the recommendation. So which number is right? In a way, both of them are answering different questions. 34% reflects whether critics believe the remake creatively justifies itself. 90% reflects whether the verified moviegoers who bought tickets received the familiar Moana experience they wanted. And that leaves one question more interesting than either score. Does faithfully recreating a beloved film justify a remake? Or does it prove that the remake never needed to exist? Let me know which side you are on.